Hello and welcome. This is the Real Media Podcast with Thomas Barlow, your host, stumbling over his words. It's late on a Sunday afternoon. I'm here with the fantastic Tina Louise from Nanas Against Fracking. Today we're going to be talking about the fracking campaign, where it's come from, what successes it's had, most importantly, how it's been organised, because I think it's been one of the most vibrant and interesting and effective and powerful campaigns in the UK. And I think, you know, consistently it's proven to push back fracking when in other parts of the world fracking has made great strides. So, yeah, without further ado, it's a pleasure to chat to you today, Tina.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. We know each other for a while back now, and we've done a few bits and bobs together.
2014 Talk Fracking Tour.
2014, which is now,
you know, 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years, which is sad.
Yes, flying.
Yeah. Because that used to be the future in my head.
Yeah.
You know, some place for sci-fi film. So, like, we're kind of talking about like how we'd like to sort of chat through this, which is one, why is fracking a really good and really important issue to talk about and fight and work with, and then secondly, how has the fracking movement organised? You know, what organisations does it have, and how do you go about starting off this stuff? And hopefully, this is a way that everyday people can learn how to start coming together and make changes. This is the point of this podcast, is to say, look, actually, not only are certain issues important, but this is how you go about tackling those issues. This is how you start coming together. This is how we start fighting for justice and peace for all, and, you know, and winning and making that change. And we all do want to make that change deep down, even the ones of us who've given up and what have you know, scared or trying to just, you know, ostrich it, head in the sand, go, do you know what, sod it, like, I can't focus on this now.
We've actually had a lot of older activists who've been involved in campaigns in the past, who had then been, you know, grown despondent or not felt they'd achieved or what they wanted to and gone away, and then who've come in again because of the fracking movement. And we've had people say, no, this is it, this has galvanised me again. It's too important. You see, the difference, the way I would define the difference between the fracking movement and lots of other activism is where we care. I mean, we can all care about lots of issues. Air and water is a universal need for survival, and without it, no other issue really would. If you can't drink the water and breathe the air, then whatever we're fighting for is not going to survive. So for all the things that are important to fight for in life, and I never wanted to be a single issue. I wasn't that environmental. I really wanted to address the system that I could see stealing money from the disabled and giving it to banks. To me, there was an inequality that was no longer tolerable, and I'd finally reached my breaking point in 2011. But I hadn't been an activist before that. And I think it's really hard when you've not been an activist to find, who are you as an activist? What happens when you do decide to say, do you know what, I'm just not walking life's path anymore. I refuse to be driven in a direction. I refuse to be part of something that I see so abhorrent that I am going to stop moving in that direction, which puts you counter to the system that you live in. And then once you do that, it's a very alien place to find yourself, and then to work out who are you in that picture. And so you go to people who are activists, and you know, and you're no longer with your own world and social sector and the things that you once, you know, valued. All priorities change, you know, suddenly, and especially with, you know, once I bumped into fracking as a subject, when it was just coming to the UK in 2011, it was so obviously a clear and present danger to our children that it affects the air and the water. So you felt obliged then. So if anything, actually, I felt like fracking stole me from the activism I was intending, which was I wanted to address the system of government, and I wanted to address how it had been that it had been so clearly hijacked at some point, then ceased to be a true democracy, because it was masquerading as one, but behind the scenes there were lobbyists, and there was that revolving door between industry and politicians that made it so clear that this was not working for the people of the country. So that was my real issue. But the gift of fracking, if you can say it brought anything useful with it, is that it's like a direct route. If you say, like, all of societal problems are a symptom of that diseased system we were led to believe was democracy, then fracking is a symptom that impacts everybody. It's the biggest, ugliest boil that if it explodes, we all die. You know, or our children are impacted in the future and cannot survive because the air and the water would be so tarnished. So I think it does give you access then to, I don't know, I see it with new activists all the time, with residents become aware of the risk of fracking in their community, that initially they think they're going to fight fracking, and then they realise they've got to deal with the fact that the media is lying to them, the fact that the academic world has been bought out and that the funding comes from the energy sector, and therefore you can't trust those reports. And then they realise that when they asked their MP for help, he was gung-ho for it and counter to what they demanded as a community, and that then they approached their local council and they realised it's actually a powerless body that lays around doing nothing, doesn't do the things that they need it to do. And so I think that, you know, fracking does open the whole problem up because it has every part of it in it, you know.
Yeah. So, I mean, because that's a really interesting thing. And I think a lot of people will find that in a lot of different campaigns, actually, is that if you're fighting against the arms trade, for instance, you'll have to go, well, there's lobbyists behind the arms trade, there's entire industries. Well, the media, like, for instance, the BBC, the chair of the BBC Trust is also the chair of BAE Weapon Systems, for instance, you know, just as an example. And then they go, oh, and it causes migration, which causes, you know, and it's used by national governments, you know, to divide and rule other nations and creates racism and all of that. So, sorry, I was just going to say that it's an interesting path that people go down, and that, but it's really important, as you say, with fracking specifically, it's there, it's present, it's going to be in your community. Yeah, see, who's going to come to that?
To the arms issue? People who are already aware that there's a problem, so they're already aware. When you come to the fracking issue, I'd say 80% of the people who we've met forming 400 groups across the country in the last 6 years never done anything in their life that was activism.
Yeah.
So this is an entirely new thing. So where I already cared about the arms trade, I already cared about war, I already cared about those things. So I was kind of half expecting what I walked into.
Yeah.
When we went to communities and said, we never even discussed the environment. Our way was just to go in and say, there's a drilling company coming to your town. What they're going to do is going to put your water and your air at risk, which will in turn affect your agriculture and your children's health.
Yeah.
You may want to create some community resistance to this, but you couldn't give them the full story. And by the way, your media's lying, the academic world's this and the other. And I always called it, especially when we did it as nanas, which was the we'd lull you in with a cake, tea, and a pretty meeting, and it was to gently guide you into the sheer drop of activism, because you know as well as I do that the day before you were an activist, it was okay. Everything seemed a bit okay, and then all of a sudden you were in activism. You can't put a toe into activism, because once you're in, you're either in. You're just in. You're stuck. You can't then go, oh, I tell you what, I'm going to unknow all those truths I now know and walk away and let everybody else deal with it. And that's what happens. And it's been an astounding journey to watch, instead of people who are understanding some of the problems coming to more awareness, you're getting people who had no idea there was a problem.
Yeah, though I hope we can use more positive terms than being stuck. You know, I find there, you know, that rather than, for instance, you know, like I'll find with certain friends or certain people that I know that every 6 months or a year or a couple of years or so, there will be an issue that comes up, maybe Trump getting elected or something like that, and the world seems a dark place, and you go, oh my gosh, and then you try and turn off from it, hide from it, and there's a nagging sense that life is not good, and but you just don't confront it. Whereas I think I find my life as an activist rewarding, because every day I'm getting up and doing something about it, and then when I relax because I you know, because I know that the issue's there, but I'm always working on it. I'm always trying to do something, and I hope that you find activism rewarding. But I mean, would you say that you?
I don't know that this is activism, really. When I went and I found Occupy, and I had this clear idea of how I was going to research and learn and tackle and try and work with others to find ways to make the world a better, more fair place, is totally different from who I am as a grandmother preventing harm coming to the children. That's an obligation, that's choice. What we do when we fight fracking, and I find this at the roadside where we are now, is that we are all there and we are stuck there. How can I go home? We've done 47 days. I won't go home till we stop the drill. None of us will. And these people who have just come to activism, there isn't one of us who will not lay under that drill on the day it attempts to get into our ground, because all of our children's future is at stake. It is that serious that you can't put it on pause. There has been no pause. There is no day off. How could there be? Someone is coming towards the children with danger. How can you take... I can't take a day off. So, I wish I could, but not now at this point. I mean, certainly over the 6 years, yeah, there's been huge rewards. I mean, the biggest rewards were... Every time we went to a community, and like all communities, it's a mixed bag in the room. You know, there's the landowners, the unemployed, there's every sector of society in the room, because it's air and water. It's not air and water for the rich or the poor or this class or that class or anything, or your employment level. It's air and water. And so people come. And then when you walk away after delivering the information they need to know, we didn't tell them how to do their activism. We just said, you'll need a community response. And when they said, what should we do? We kind of, because there wasn't enough of us at the beginning, we were doing the whole country and running like Paul Revere across and going, you've just got a license, you've just got a license. And so you were kind of just leaving them with, here's the things we did, and you might want to come up with some of your own ideas, really, because every town is different. And you go away, but we would always end up going back for their first or second meeting that this newly formed community groups would do, and they always formed a group. And it was so rewarding. And also because no two groups were the same. Like Fleetwood, up where we are, is one feisty community. And some of the women in that group were probably what inspired us to become nanas, because there was no stopping them. There was as soon as they realized what was there, they were at war as far as they were concerned. They were at war to protect their young. Other places, like, say, Misson in North Yorkshire, a very beautiful community centre we were in. Everything was lovely. Was it Misson? No, I think it was. Yeah, it was. Milton Rooms. And they had different priorities in their group. And so what they did was they pooled money and resources, and they brought in professional help, and they brought in and did their own surveys, and they did their own studies, and they employed a lawyer, and everyone did their own thing. Salford, totally different. Again, whichever community you did. But that was when you realised that activism and community fight back is probably a better way of calling it.
Yeah.
Because when they paid over for their professionals, all of that information was available to the groups that hadn't raised as much money. When they had a drill coming to their doorstep, those who could endure camps and do lock-ons turned up to give them help. And initially, it was a very hard weaving, but when people realised that your child is as much as danger as my child, then people pulled together. And I think it's been one of the most uplifting things I've ever done, as well as one of the most soul-destroying at the same time. And you don't stop, because, as I say, it's like someone is currently running towards us. And we're in a very unique position in the UK, in that in America, Canada, Australia, they are fighting to stop fracking. And it's a hard fight. They're in courts. They've got gagging orders. It's costing the earth. These industries are already embedded because they're not as densely populated as us. So consequently, the industries got embedded into these areas that were not populated. And it took a long time before they realised, when it hit the water supplies in the air. Whereas for the UK, it's totally different. We haven't started fracking yet. We're in a position to stop it from getting started. Because I do believe that if it gets started, life becomes a whole lot more difficult, because it becomes all about courts of law. And as I'm sure you've realised as much as every other activist on the planet, finding justice is a costly business, and it's nothing to do with what is just and fair. It's to do with who can employ the best barrister,
Yeah. I think I'm just trying to think of a, sort of final question on the fracking issue itself before sort of talking about how to organise. So it's this immediate. So do you find that the motivations across the board seem to be urgency, importance to tackle this now for the sake of ourselves, our children, right here on our doorstep. Yeah. And do you find that across the country? And is that being everyone's
every community meeting got it? Everyone got it. It wasn't hard, we never, the industry says, they scaremonger, they show these videos, and we actually deliberately show the plainest of videos, and it just simply shows how the drill operates, what depth it goes to, what it does underground, and you just turn to the room and you say, do you see any points where there could be some problems with that? And most people, if nothing else, would ask, what happens at the end? Because you've just drilled through our aquifer. And you've drilled through our protective layers. And you're telling us that it's not going to impact us and it's fine, it's so far down. And that the steel and the cement will hold it okay because you've left half the waste down there. But steel and cement do not last the lifetime of the planet. So if the least you were asking is, when did the steel and cement corrode down to nothing, in which case half of everything, the chemical, water and sand that they push down to frack, and they pick up naturally occurring radioactive material while it's down there, so it becomes this highly toxic sludge, only half of it comes back with the gas. The other half stays. And when you ask, where does that go? Not one person on the planet will be able to tell you that answer. There is no answer. They do not monitor it. They should do 3D monitoring so that they can see the movement. There's a European directive, which is the mining waste directive, that if you've done any mining, you must monitor any liquid waste for 30 years over a 20-mile radius. So they have no intention of doing that. So the least thing you could worry about is the entire future. But in the immediacy of it, when you put the well in and it starts to flow with the gas, well, 1 in 6 will fail on installation. This is an industry fact from Schlumberger, the biggest driller in the world. And all wells will fail over time by virtue of the fact that the steel and the cement will break down. And there's a 50% fail rate by year 5, I think it is. So they've just invested a huge amount of money. And they're going to do, the government's trying to reassure us now. They're going, it's okay. We're going to do this really big study and we're going to find out if it's okay under there. Well, I've been given the license. You've got a drill coming. You've drilled test holes and test fracked already. And now you're going to do a study. How astounding. It's just... And people are as gobsmacked, which is quite good that they are as gobsmacked. But I mean, I think, it's like in the 6 years, I can honestly say there must be, every other day I'll say... I used to say to my sister, oh my God, look, that's going to change everything. Because surely now we know that. Nothing would happen. And now we know that. Nothing would happen. And then on it goes. And you wonder... it's that you self-empower to become an activist, to stand up and protect your young, and there's a huge amount of power in that because, like I said, it's not a chosen battle, it's an obligation. And I think maybe particularly when you've got kids and stuff, you feel even more driven and obliged because you empathise with, their futures. And you feel obliged to have left the place in a half-decent state for them. Not necessarily thinking that in an environmental context, because sometimes when we did the meetings, we found that the use of the terms environmental and climate, because those words have been so misappropriated and bandied about by the old world media to muddy their message, that it worked out a lot simpler for communities if we just addressed their current concerns in their community with air, water, and the growing soil, which I think you'll admit that air, water, and the soil you grow your food in is actually the environment affected by climate. Yeah. But we don't define it that way because what's the point? I find most of the problems I encounter in my world of activism are all communications-based. Yeah. It's the misappropriation of words and the inability to understand each other's interpretation of them. So talking about that then, let's talk about communicating with people and what are the practically, if you're going to go around trying to organise this kind of thing, as you said, you were running around organising community meetings. How do you organise a community meeting? I mean, what do you have to do? Do you print posters? Where do you put them? Where do you get the money from? Who does all of this stuff? You see, I think that the world has changed so much since we've had the internet and social media and stuff like that. So consequently, I think I would imagine that campaigning in the past, we would have gone, how can we reach the most number of people at a time? Whereas now we think, how can we fine-tune this message so it's understood by the most people in this small community at once, that they get what we're here for? And you weren't fussed about reaching the biggest audience, but you were fussed about at least reaching the parents because it would radiate out from them. So, we would do things like go into part of the way that we did it was to organise, after we'd go and do leafleting in a town centre, in a shopping centre, and we'd be talking to people because the people who come to the meetings, if you just advertised a meeting, it would be people, again, much like I said with the arms trade, who are already ready to hear. You had to go and find them and explain. And fracking, it was really an ugly subject, complex. It was not a fun thing to explain. But I think you did it with warm, human, one-to-one. That's literally how we did it. And I know it sounds absurd, but you can't take an advert in a big newspaper and expect anyone to pay any attention. And we also discovered that, and we found this, I think, remember when we did Occupy Democracy in Parliament Square? Oh, yeah. And I think it was very obvious then the difference between the way, like, say, we as the nanas chose to do the way that we do this, is that we tend to use smiles. And I said to you before, it's that sheer drop into activism. But first we have to get you to the subject, And we were standing in Parliament Square, and there were many angry people with many damned fine reasons to be angry, and angry signs and angry faces and angry messages. Now what we do up in Lancashire is we stand with a big sunny yellow sign and we smile and we wave, and people find it just natural to look at you. And you're smiling and waving. You're a fellow human being who looks a bit like they do. No one's going to come and engage with me if I'm frowning and angry and I tell you, damn, we're all going to hell in a handbasket. They're going to ruin the water supply. And if you take out the Sherwood aquifer, Jesus, you've just taken out, something. You cannot clean an aquifer. You can't give it a wash later. You can't flood it with more to try and dilute it. This is just impossible. That this is something that if we go into this, there is no going back, So you couldn't say all that. And also I think, again, if I'm constantly going to be an angry person, I add to the anger of the world. We really could do with a little bit more human kindness and understanding. And so I did notice on the second day of Occupy, because we stood out with our happy signs and waves, and one of them always says honk support, So people, beep, 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 beep. And then it started. It was really mad beeping all the way through Parliament Square, and it was brilliant. And the next day I noticed some of the other people with other reasons to be there, waving and a little honk support sign. And then the beeping started for them too, because I just think that we are angry. Our reasons are literally life and death that we do what we do. But you can't live every day like that, and you can't hope for people to come to you for the first time if that's your frame of mind. So we come to it with a real compassion and understanding that the day before you were an activist, you weren't, and nor was I. So no one is excluded from this. It's not like, what took you so long to be here? Why aren't you standing at the roadside? Why can't you give more? And we have so much support. And, you think that we've done 47 days at a roadside now, stopping every day to slow trucks. There are lock-ons that occur. We challenge them every day. We've taken 3 suppliers out of the supply chain, and we're working very effectively in this campaign. And this is something that we've encouraged people to do, because there are a lot of disabled people, people with care responsibilities, people who work, who say, well, I understand it's a threat to my children, but at what point do I give up work and say, well, I'm no longer going to support your health, your education, your food and your home, because this matters too much. It's self-defense for your family. And you don't know at what point you do that. I mean, I was able to because no one is dependent on me in the same way they used to be. But if you have dependents, how can you be an activist, to the level that you need to be? So, but for those people, we would say to them, as you watch our live streams or see the images, if you see the phone number of the supplier, please call them and advise them that what they're doing is facilitating fracking, and that it would be in their best interest not to. Is there anything you can say that would help them to understand that? And we've also offered to crowdfund for these people, for these, for the small companies. I mean, no one's taken us up on it. They just opted out, which was great for the 3, because it crashed the stock market beautifully on the fracking industry.
Hold up. Lots and lots of details here. Let's just slow it down for a second. On communicating with people and organising the community meetings, just to wrap that up before sort of talking about the sort of actions that you've done specifically against the industry. In organising communities, what did you do? Did you go door knocking?
Yeah, we encouraged...
Or did you run stalls outside supermarkets?
Well, quite often we could tap in first, because you were going into a community raw, and you weren't going to aim at activists, but you sometimes went in with either maybe there'd be already an existing green group or Friends of the Earth or something, where you go and tap in and ask them for a little help in delivering some leaflets or whatever, and you do some of that. But mainly what we used to do is just go into where the activists aren't. There's no point in just getting activists to be active more. So we would go into a community shopping centre, and we would engage with other people walking through it and just talk.
Yeah.
And generally, I mean, it's very much a female thing in anti-fracking, I think, because it's very much marketed to men. Do you know there's a book, and it's called The Landsman's Manual, and it's what they use in America to win over the landowner to give you his land to drill on. Right. And the first line is, if the wife is home, leave. Come back when she's not. Because this industry is marketed to men. Women see through it very quickly, I think. It's just, but mainly also because it affects women's health, and we've heard more about the incidence of breast cancer, ill health, early term birth defects, miscarriages. There's so much that's dangerous to the female health, and so much that they say to men. But there's jobs, you need to provide for your family, and they sweet talk to a certain sector of the community. So, I mean, although loads of men are against it once they realise they see through it. But so initial engagement, though, in a shopping centre with women with kids was a very easy uptake on the subject, you know, and we'd also just recently got the breast cancer update from Community Health England, and that really helped us to get the message through. So you try and engage a lot of those sorts of people who were with their children, dads too if they were out with their kids, but you know, this was sometimes you know, weekdays. And then you get them to come along to the meeting. You present to the meeting in this way. You would generally have, you try and find some community leaders, you know, either you know the local doctor, vicar, MP, if they were on side. If they weren't, then we just carry it ourselves, and we'd always show. It was a movie, a really simple movie in the early days called Fracking Hell, and it was just about a community. It was about the impacts on that community, how its life changed when more vehicles, you know, 500 vehicles per frack. You know, there's a lot goes on around a fracking rig. They tell you, like where we are, there's one rugby pitch. Well, there's one rugby pitch for the pad. What you didn't mention was the ancillary bits that are taking up about another 8 rugby pitches full of, you know, storage and work area and you know, and just the whole kit and caboodle. There's masses of it. And so this movie told the community not about fracking, but about what a fracking industry will make your community feel like if it gets started. And so people related to that probably better than a science film. And then you'd move on to the actual science, and then you'd say, well, this is how it actually happens, and do you have any problems with that? And then, as I say, that progressed then, that they would form themselves into a community. And then you'd say to them, if you want to form a group and you need someone to come and help you with your first meeting, like you set the next public meeting, because there'll be a lot more people at that one, because they'll all invite their family and friends, then we're happy to come and help you. But if you feel confident enough to do this on your own, go ahead. You know, apply to us for resources. We've always shared resources. There's a site online, frack-off.org, and it's one of the best. You know, they're amazing. They don't actually have to go out and do much because they spend the whole time gathering the very best evidence and resource. Stuff you can print and so on. And Frack Free Rydale as well. 20 basic facts, you know, the simple stuff. And so you just try to simplify the message so they understood and then leave them to it.
And, okay, talking about we'll talk about organisations and then we'll talk about actions. So organisations, you mentioned Frack Off and Frack Free there.
Frack Free Rydale.
Yeah.
But if you look up your county or your town with the word fracking, you'll find A, if there's any licences, and B, if there's any community resistance groups. And at frack-off.org, you can go to the community page and they update weekly with new community groups that have formed, any camps that are set up, because we set up camps sometimes in order to... I mean, it's slightly different where we are. We're on a very main road in a densely populated area. But like over in Yorkshire, for instance, in order to stop the trucks when they start coming, they'll have to be camped nearby in order to be there all the time. So, but yeah, so it sets up new camps and also tells you your license areas and everything else.
So, because that's a really useful resource that, like, if anyone looks at the roads movement of the 90s, that was really successful, stopped 85% of all new roads being built over 6 or 7 years, I think, that people thought, and it's where a lot of camps and stuff. I interviewed Becca Lush, who's one of the organisers, and she said, you know, the headline stuff with the camps and the tree houses and swampy digging tunnels and blah, 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 and it's hugely important, a lot of sabotage on trucks and things like that. But actually, what happened was there were several hundred community groups set up, and it was winning through councillors, through local courts, and that they were all coordinated through something called Road Alert, and Frack Off reminds me of that. So it's probably just 2 or 3 people in a room, is it?
Yeah,
like,
exactly,
kind of thing,
exactly
you know?
like that, yes.
Yeah, but they provide that kind of structure. So that's a really useful, I think that's a really useful thing for people to know.
That and you're right,
2 or 3 people could do so much for so many communities, so that if you're going out and making contact with people, that there's also people who are bringing the resources so that when you've made contact, they've got something to go to.
And that's the weird thing that I think is just so beautiful about this, that no matter who you are, if you've come into the, you know, this movement of, you know, against fracking, is that you just kind of pick up a job and run with it. You don't say, here, I'm going to organise this website and collate all the information. You notice out of your periphery that someone's doing that. And then you promote that, and that enhances them and gives everybody the gift. So it's this speed of communication that perhaps because of the internet and social media and stuff, that we can get stuff around ourselves really quick. It's like if I know there's a report coming out and it's going to be a paid-for load of bump, then before it even hits the news at 10, we've already countered it with the report that debunks it. So we've already sent that out through our social media. Frackoff will have it up on the site. There's another site called, and it truly is independent journalist, but it comes over as anti-fracking because truth is anti-fracking. You know, you can't make it up. You know, she tries to give the industry room, but it's very hard to make them sound good. And that's called Drill or Drop.
Oh, yes.
And that's a journalist called Ruth Hayhurst. And she's driven, and she comes to all our court cases. She travels the length and breadth of the country, and she's just one journalist. And she maintains a weekly update on everything that's happening in and around, like the things you were just saying you discussed with Rebecca Lush, which is the councils, the courtrooms, you know, those things. Because to me, you need to have, everyone in society should be an activist, you know, when it's called for. You don't have to be an activist on every subject, but when your community requires you to stand up, you know, when there should be things that you stand up to. Because when you do, and once you have, we've noticed that once you're in, and there's no escape door. Because I always said it's like you walk through the door marked activism, and you realise you've been in the wrong room all your life, and that now there are 1,000 more doors in front of you just when you were planning on settling and doing less. But that those people realise that too. So you start off defending your community, and that gives you the ability then to stand with others to defend on other things too. And we make points, we all make a huge point of going to each other's rallying and solidarity days. So in Yorkshire and Lancashire, we make such a fuss about the uniting of the roses, you know, how united we are, and we're always journeying back and forth to each other's events to show solidarity and support. And I think someone said something once about, you know, these A to B marches, what's the point? I'm like, well, actually, it isn't for the industry, that's for us.
Yeah.
That's so I can look around me during a march and go, oof, the finest company. I'm on the right side of this. You know, there's that gives you that. You know, you need to constantly be seeing what it looks like as well, because sometimes you do fight alone, you know. So it's that reassurance that you're in great company, that these are people you respect and they come to the same conclusions.
Yeah, we physically need to be together at points as much as when we can, you know. And while protests aren't, demonstrations aren't an end in themselves, they have a use, like pretty much anything. And that's hopefully what we'll cover over the series of these podcasts, is that all tactics, all ways of organising will have a use. Yeah. And it's learning how to apply them at the right time in the right way. But in just talking finally on organisations, are there any other organisations that you thought of that do a particular role that's quite useful for fracking? Because you mentioned journalists.
Yeah, I know that sometimes we diss the NGOs, you know, because maybe they've not been as effective in some things as people would like. But I will say that 100% for our movement, Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace have pulled together at various times and pulled for our communities, and sometimes they do the stuff that we can't do, like watching the council register of planning changes. I couldn't possibly stay on top of that. Most of us couldn't. However, Friends of the Earth's lawyer watches that stuff for us and alerts the anti-fracking community when things change on planning. This is vital to us. The same way that we wanted a rally, and it was better if it was organised by Friends of the Earth. It was palatable. And we did actually have some other things planned for later that would not have suited Friends of the Earth. But for that bit, to get everybody there, it made it approachable and well organised, well publicised. So you can use the existing groups too. Green Party, you know, they've been behind us from the start. I think they've been probably against fracking since they were born, but they didn't know that fracking existed. But they were obviously always going to be against it. So they raised the subject. Labour Party came out with, and we need them to follow through now. They've said, absolutely, if we're in power, we are going to stop fracking. Yeah. But what about today and tomorrow? Where are you? Why aren't you on the roadside? Where is your presence? Lib Dems, we're against fracking. Well, where are you? We know we get some pockets of them, but we actually need a great big show of this. So I think we need to, we've said in the anti-fracking movement that you see it, that there's a need for activism in every arena. So it's not just activism on the streets, it's not just lock-ons, it's not just slow walks and cabs, but there is activism in the political parties, and activism, this one particularly, because it's air and water that can reach into everything else because it affects everything, is then to have that for the political parties. And the unions have been fantastic. But they're very lumbering, solid machines, and sometimes we're acting nimbly and doing things in a day, and we want a feedback in a day or a bit of support from the unions. It takes them longer to come together, but when they do, they're fantastic. They create some of the great events for us. Unite, the union's been brilliant. TUC, and in fact, every union is anti-fracking except the GMB because they're the gas workers. So yeah, and then quite got the hang of the danger of the job they do.
And not realising that actually the money spent on fracking could be better spent elsewhere for even their own union members. But so you mentioned a bunch of things there: lock-ons, camps, slow walking. What are those things?
Okay.
And how how do they work?
So if you for us, the purpose is when you're watching the site build every day, you actually need to be physically doing something. So for the people at the roadside, we need to be doing something to make that go slower or to stop. And so we will get in front of the trucks and we will walk slowly. It's our right to do that. It's an accepted right. We did it in Bolcombe, Barton Moss and the other places where we slowed fracking down. You won't win necessarily through that, but you will delay. And what the delay does that people don't often see is we watch the stock market too. So the people who invest in fracking in the UK, I'll just tell you what they said on their forum. It was insulting, but they said the protesters may be thick in the head and thin on the ground, but now they've started taking out suppliers. It looks like they've got tactics. I'm out. And then there was this big sell-off, and then it plummeted because we got 3 suppliers to stop supplying Quadrilla. So you thought, oh, that's a good one then. So now we must move on. It's like the other day we were outnumbered. They brought in like 3 times as many police, and it was just pointless. We couldn't slow walk a single truck. No lock-on was possible. We couldn't even get close. And a lock-on is where you lock onto the gates of the site, and it takes them about 10 hours to get you off, especially an 8-person lock-on.
And so a lock-on, and just to clarify that, because you can lock onto anything, is usually taking bicycle locks, knee locks, putting them around your throat or parts of your body and locking yourself to an object. Sometimes it could be a digger or a truck or a gate or stationary piece of movement. There's other things.
And you put your arms through pipe and chain together with cement, and then they have to bring in the protester removal team. And, they don't seem to rush, but don't forget our cops live there too. Maybe they're not as enthusiastic about stopping us as they could be. I mean, there's been some brutality and it's been quite awful for people. But that is less, it's now, it certainly wasn't as much in the previous 40-odd days, But it's certainly started to rank up now, but that's because everyone's getting angry. There's no progress at the site. The police are being hounded continuously by Quadrilla to protect them and to allow work to progress. They're using union laws against us, which we're asking the unions to look into. So they're saying that the right to work for the workers on the site trumps our right to protest. And, of course, we'd like to challenge that legally. But, see, that's where you can get a nice union like Unite or PCS to get angry on your behalf, and they can work with that. And sometimes it's like when you said, what groups and organisations, and sometimes you can just trust once you're aware of the types of people, is every type of people in this, is that someone said the other day, who's sending through the images of every day's breaches of planning to the council and to the head of police? And I was like, various. I couldn't have named, but I know we have 3 councillors at the roadside every day, so they document. And when they're mailed to, they reply with images and so on. I know we have people who are driven to keep on informing the police about what's happened. So you can actually start to trust within the movement that you are picking up the jobs that need doing. And I think it was Vanessa Vine who said on the first time I met her, I went, Dolly just arrived at the anti-fracking movement. I said to someone who'd already been working hard, maybe we should, and she went, oh, it doesn't matter what you're going to say next, but if that's a job you think should be done, it's all yours. I was like, ooh, yeah, I get that. And now I feel that too, which is if you can see something. But I think it's enabling people to choose their form of activism. I mean, what do you want to do? How do you want to fight this? What do you think would have effect? And whatever that is, that's good. I think we sometimes, a lot of people feel a bit locked out of activism and self-empowerment because they see it as, going to do a lock-on, going to start a camp, maybe I need to sign up to these socialist principles, maybe I shouldn't eat meat, maybe I should definitely not be this and not wear that and not do that. And it makes them feel like that it's a closed group they can't get into. I think fracking opens up that pathway and says it's air and water. Don't worry about what anyone thinks, just get on with the job of protecting it, and people do.
And to mention a few other tactics then, there's things like letter writing to counsellors, to papers, to professionals and academics.
Yeah.
You know, and actually, by the way, that takes time, takes skills to put together good letters and stuff like that. But I'm noticing in the background that maybe
Time is running short.
Time is running short. So,
but with regard to that,
yeah,
there's a lot of the people who spent 18 months preparing the appeal legal work and put their hearts and souls and their lives on hold. And no one saw that because it wasn't on a front line. And I'm constantly hearing them say, I'm so sorry I can't be there. And you're like, wow, you've totally trashed your life and your health. And you're now on to the second, because we've got a judicial review coming up on the 15th. And they're now putting their hearts and souls in that. And it is soul-destroying work. It eats up. Your nighttime reading is documents this deep on planning regulations. You know, it takes over their entire lives. But because you can't see them on the front line, no one's going, wow, what a hero. But it is no less activism. And you're right, the letter writing, we have another guy who maybe doesn't play well in a group. Perhaps he's a little difficult in a group because he's quite anal and particular. But that particular makes him the perfect counter to every troll online. And you will find him on just articulate, and he can take you down with his words. And that is no less important than locking on either. You know, and you're right, there is a role for everybody. Whatever you think you're up to, that's good, great, do that.
Yeah. And I guess to finally mention that it's worth, as you said, you know, you targeted suppliers there. It's always worth, when you're thinking about these tactics, you know, that whether it's a demonstration or letter writing or whatever it is, none of it is worth anything. A tactic comes from the word tactile, Latin, to touch, right? It's what you do immediately. It's
I didn't know that.
Right? Strategy is your overall plan.
Oh.
And there's a difference between the two. I was taught this by a Latin teacher.
Clever
right?
you.
Yeah, no, he taught me, like, he was an army major who quit the army to protest the Iraq War. He was a top guy. But quite particular, doesn't play well in groups, you know. There are those types in the movement. You know, is to have the strategy of what are you aiming for. So, for instance, targeting suppliers, that has been a great, animal rights groups have done it, anti-fascist groups have done it. It's been a great tactic to work out, okay, what underpins, if we can't, first off, we've got to slow down the drills, but how else can we target them? Can we target the people who put money into it, to the stock market? Can we target their PR company? Can we target? So
they can't find a cement supplier. They're really struggling. And it's vital. They can't build the pad without the cement. But we've made every cement supplier aware that we know your load is going off in 40 minutes. So wherever you think you are in the country heading to this site, we will stop and delay you so that your cement load goes off and you can go away. And they will never get cement if we have our way. They've been bringing it in and making it on site. They brought in powdered variety. Now they're having to make little batches, but it's pathetic for a site that big. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's right. That's the kind of interruption you want. I'm just thinking that's brilliant. That's exactly it. And that illustrates it brilliantly. And sadly, we've run out of time. We will have to what we will do is come up and interview you in other places. And
we're there every weekday on Preston New Road, just outside Blackpool. It's PR4 3PE. And it's a long road that links Preston with Blackpool. And the worst thing about it, it's a 50-mile-per-hour priority ambulance road. If someone's in an ambulance on that road, they've got 8 minutes to death. That's why it's an important road that makes the challenges we face so difficult. So when we slow walk, the early days, because it was single lane closure for the building works, we slow walked within their work area, because the police realised that the only safe way everyone's got to stay alive and still get their right to protest was that they did not stop us going in there. So we were in there for the 15-minute slow walks on every truck. And then when they've now got rid of the single lane, now the road is back to 50 mile per hour, the ambulance is coming, so the lock-on's the most effective one now. Now you just stop them, and the amazing protectors who run up there and do that in the morning before they even start work, so at 6:45, are locked on in little pairs of twos and on the floor or on the gates before they start work, and then that's a whole day wasted. And then we've got Wednesdays, which is a really important day. If anyone's available, we're doing give up work on Wednesdays. Go on, just have a day off. Have a day off. Call in sick. We'll hope the media won't be there. They never are. So, and then just come up to us and give up your day and come and join us on Wednesdays. Because last Wednesday was our first of that type, and it was brilliant. Everyone, there were over 250 people came that day. So they all just stood in the site entrance, and no one moved us. with a fantastic. There was drumming and singing and dancing because no one dared even move us. So we like that on Wednesdays, and then something else is going to start happening on Fridays. We're going to start theming the days. Again, it's about a matter of making it accessible to people and for people to understand a little bit about how they could contribute. You know, I mean, along our hedge is decorated with our children's toys and yellow ribbons, and no one has ever taken that down. It's directly opposite the site, and we cover it with things from our families so that every day the site staff and the police understand why we're here.
Yeah. Excellent. So where can people find out about Preston New Road? Is it on Facebook?
If you're on Facebook, there's a Preston New Road rolling roadside protest. On Twitter, well, we all tend to work a bit as self. So, I mean, if you find me on Twitter, Tina Louise UK. Yeah. Another guy that's really worth finding, and he's on Twitter too, is River Rain. Now, he's in Bolton, but he works the morning shift over at Bolton, where the contractors AE8s like to work, like to get their staff out from their headquarters, so they prevent them leaving. They do a little annoyance every single day for us, which is glorious.
So we're national. Okay, cool. So you can find out those places. You can find out more through Real Media.
And again, if you look
we'll
up,
post up links.
And absolutely frackoff.org and Drill or Drop. That keeps you right up to date with everything that's happening. And we all live stream and stuff as well. So.
Okay, excellent. Tina Louise, this has been a thorough pleasure, an absolute win. I hope everyone at home enjoys that. I hope viewers and listeners have enjoyed that. And if you want to get in touch with Real Media, check us out at realmedia.press and email us at info@realmedia.press. Thank you very much. Cool. And I think we're done. Or maybe we're not.
I like the delay, yes.
Okay.
That was good, non-volatile. You're avoiding all the stuff that would have made me mad, shouty.